And now the second former president of IFLA is going to speak to us from the remote corner of New Zealand.
Hal and Cass, this is being videoed in a beautiful little sanctuary that Rongwhakata, my tribe, have been protecting and rehabilitating. I thought it was just the right place for this. So this is a celebration of your work. Hal Moggridge is a quintessential ambassador for the global profession of landscape architecture. I know him as a diplomatic and empathetic colleague, kind, generous, and above all, very wise. He remains an eminent leader of practice, heritage, cultural landscape, and is deeply respected for his in-depth knowledge. I've been invited by his colleagues of FOLAR to speak of my work with Hal during the time that I was with the International Federation of Landscape Architects governance team. This opportunity not only allows me to reinforce the timeliness and appropriateness of this occasion, but also to redress some of the omissions on my part, and I will speak to my understanding of Hal's work with ICOMOS and their International Scientific Cultural Landscape Committee, his contribution to the historic urban landscape approach to heritage management, and his very helpful guidance when I was IFLA Secretary General and President, especially in addressing sensitive governance matters, and the omissions on my part, which also helped to paint the particular picture of Hal's fine character. I last spent time with Hal in Oslo in 2019. We were both there for an IFLA conference and took the opportunity to meet as a small cultural landscape group. Hal brought people together, reinforced their contribution, and encouraged greater involvement in cultural landscape and heritage. Hal was a staunch member of ICOMOS and the Cultural Landscape Committee and could be relied on to share the learning at conferences, as he did many times, such as a paper I recall on protection of skylines. I think it was the London skyline, which had come from a practice project. However, it is his contribution to the historic urban landscape approach which brought landscape architecture and heritage together in an important way. Previously, the strategy of the International Committee of Monuments and Sites, that is ICOMOS, had been a somewhat disjointed, spotty protection of monuments as heritage without an extensive application to the geographic setting, the cultural landscape context. This changed in 2011 with the UNESCO World Heritage Committee's introduction of the Historic Urban Landscape Framework, not as an international convention, but as an approach which the World Heritage Centre planners, urban designers, managers, communities and heritage practitioners globally could adopt and modify according to the changes in context and culture. AI tells us this: the historic urban landscape approach, HUL, is a framework for managing heritage in dynamic urban environments. It recognizes that cities are the result of layered historic and cultural values, extending beyond traditional historic centres to encompass the entire urban context and its geographical setting. The HUL approach emphasises the interconnectedness of natural, cultural, tangible and intangible elements, advocating for their consideration in urban planning and development. In effect, the concepts of layering, interconnectedness, and participatory city planning, which have been part of the practice of landscape architecture, were incorporated into the approach advocated internationally for historic city heritage protection by the World Heritage Centre. Over many years of sensitive suggestions and demonstration of how better cognizance of landscapes could be achieved, Hal and his colleagues in ICOMOS had brought landscape architecture to the fore. For this, we can all be grateful and proud. We have such a colleague as Hal because his work smoothed the way for others, and I think Hal and Hal were just a coincidence. Incidentally, the approach aligns with Indigenous views of interconnectedness in all elements of our world. For Indigenous, our environments and the holistic approach to responses. Wise and moderate advice is the hallmark of Hal's approach, not as a prima donna, but as a steadfast, tenacious supporter and guide. As with many glowing international professional groups, Hal IFLA has had its moments of volatility and dispute, and Hal's skill in resolving such aspects with equanimity and goodwill in finding ways through the mire that some of these issues become were invaluable to the IFLA executive. So I thank Hal for his knowledge, composure, and help in finding sound outcomes. He's been very generous with his time and expert in finding resolutions which open the door for people to move forward. At the same time, conserving precious elements of our professional history. Hal offered me his hospitality and introduced me to his family and colleagues in the Landscape Institute when I was in England. This included meeting his son and seeing the beautiful artwork in the Chapel of Christ College, Cambridge, when I was part of a conference at Jesus College nearby. My omissions with Hal have embarrassed me, and I've regretted not being able to present Hal with the President's Award, which was my intention when President of the International Federation of Landscape Architecture. I'd wanted to make the presentation of the award in person, but when the award was with me at the appropriate venue, Hal had been unable to be there, and vice versa. And then came the earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand, where I was living at the time, and the award didn't survive, along with many boxes of IFLA documents. Hal, I apologise for this failure on my part. I've mentioned that Hal was always generous with his time and willing to contribute when asked. I was working on a book in New Zealand to celebrate landscape and asked Hal if he would help. He wrote a wonderful article from a practice investigation in the UK, but the editor of the book thought the article didn't quite fit the curation she had planned. The article was put instead on a website, but I was embarrassed that Hal's goodwill was somehow not given the welcome it deserved. While Hal has given so much to the landscape architecture profession, and with Cass has been so very welcome in any events he's been able to attend, I'm overjoyed that now, with this event, we're able to recognise his selfless support, generosity, wisdom, and leadership. And as a mark of this, colleagues who are here and have been leaders in IFLA have something special for you. I join with you in thanking and celebrating Hal Moggridge and his lifetime work. Thank you, Tim Gale, for this invitation, and I hand back to my valued colleague Martha for the presentation.
Yeah.